Good evening. It is September 19th, 2018, and I'd like to call the Wyndham Raymond School District Board of Directors to order.
Kate
Mr.
Brooks.
Prince?
Kate
Present.
Brooks. Eric Colby.
Present.
Jenny Cummins.
Present.
Don Dillon.
Present.
Marge Gamoni.
Here.
Pete Hensler.
Here.
Anna Kenny.
Here.
Kate Lavia.
Here.
Scott McLean.
Here.
And that's it.
All right, you're getting better.
Will you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I don't think there are any adjustments to the agenda, Mr. Prince? Okay, it's now time for public input. Okay, seeing nobody leaping up. Our first piece of business is the 6-12 grading and reporting presentation. So, y'all are on.
Nice to see you all tonight. I have a couple of folks joining me. I'm Drew Patton, the principal of Wyndham Middle School. We have Randy Crockett, the principal of Jordan Small and Raymond Elementary, and Ryan Karen, the new Wyndham High School principal. So tonight I'm going to go through some slides. Each of us has a different piece in this, but we just want to talk to you about some of the changes between middle school and high school grading and reporting. So we'll start off with a brief history. So Randy's going to take that just because he has a few more years in the district than Ryan or myself.
I'm the old guy.
Yeah.
So I won't read you the whole slide, but I also want you to realize that Wyndham Middle School actually started working in a more proficiency-based or standards-based, which we called at the time, grading system under Hal Shortsleeve. We're talking 10, 12 years ago. And the change here at Jordan Small was about 10 years ago. We went from a 0 to 100 traditional scale, and we spent a lot of time working as a staff to decide how would we address standards-based, proficiency-based, and ended up with a 3-point scale. So there's been several evolutions of this. You know, the old Wyndham Middle School scale was exceeds, meets, does partially meets, and does not meets, and so forth. So it's kind of been a process, and we've gotten better at separating things. One of the key things that happened was the separating academic behaviors from academic content knowledge. And for those of us that grew up in the old system, I call it the kitchen sink approach to grading. So especially at the high school level, but also at junior high, we used to call it when I was a kid, way back then. Yeah, that you know, you got X amount of percentage for class participation, and you got something for homework, and you got something for short essays or written work, and so your grade became an amalgam of a bunch of stuff, and an average was spit out at the end based on that 0 to 100 scale. So the first thing we really worked on was separating scoring on habits of work. We didn't call it that back then. At Jordan Small, we called it effort grades, but it was the same concept. 2 different sets of scoring, so you could really see what does the student understand in the content and how are they working as a student. Because my argument was always, you don't really know what a B- or a C+ really means. It might mean you have a very hard-working student who really doesn't understand the content. They're not really proficient. Or you could have somebody who's not very good with their work habits, might not always be so cooperative in class, might not be participating, have poor attendance, but be able to really demonstrate high knowledge skills on any given unit. And they would both end up with a C+, B- type score. So we've come a long way from that, but that's kind of the underlaying of all this. And then things kind of ramped up when that law went into effect for high schools. And that started driving the urgency, I think. And I don't remember which the next slide is, but
So
Ryan will address the high school stuff.
one way that that works for me in terms of thinking about things is cogs of a wheel that are moving in at sort of in different places at different times. And so as the middle school cog was turning and going through its transformation, you also had the high school that was turning and going through its transformation. Based off of LD 1422, each high school interpreted that law in a different way. Ryan can probably talk about South Portland and where that cog ended up stopping for South Portland High School. Wyndham High School stopped in a particular place, and at the same time, the middle school stopped in a particular place. And then so when they stop and we look at the alignment, there are pieces that are aligned and there are pieces that are not aligned. So when we take a look at the transition, which is really important from middle school to high school, what we're arriving at is that the worlds were vastly different. Had it been South Portland High School, there would actually have been more similarities between middle school grading practices and high school grading practices. But because the high school landed where they did, we wanted to make sure that we were more in alignment with what their practices are, so that kids are better prepared when they get to the high school. Freshman year is a challenging year. Doesn't matter whether it was 1970 or 2018. It's always been challenging, so we wanted to better prepare students for that. Any questions about the history? I know there's a lot there. This is really condensed, but I just want to make sure we answered any of those before moving on. Okay. So some of the challenges. One of the differences is that freshmen, based off of the middle school system, it was hard for freshmen to understand a new system because they hadn't experienced it before. And so some of the things that come up is a common language. And so when you have different grading scales, you don't have a common language, that makes that transition that much harder for students going over becoming freshmen. The thing that hasn't changed, and I just want to be clear about that, is middle schools and elementary schools have never been credit-based systems. So that's not something new, that all of a sudden Wyndham Middle School wasn't a credit-based system and the high school was. But that in of itself is a big thing for students, is understanding that to be able to get a high school diploma, I have to get credits. We don't have graduation diplomas for the middle school. There isn't that for elementary school. So that in of itself is a big change for middle school students getting into their freshman year. Freshman failure rates are a concern. We always look at those. That's something that the high school greatly tracks. As middle school principals, Randy and I are very interested in that, because that tells us sort of a predictor of success and how much of a struggle students are having as they enter their freshman year. That can impact their grade. We want students to start off on a positive note. We want them to start off in high school feeling successes, so that they can breed off of those successes and continue it on. The middle school brain is also a challenge. And part of that is middle school brains are, as many of you that have had middle schoolers or middle schoolers in the buildings, it tends to be day to day or even minute to minute. So thinking about what next year entails, or what they want to do, what college they want to go to, or career prep they want to go to as a senior, is really difficult for them. And so trying to get them to invest in, well, you need this education now because it's going to help you in high school, that's a challenge in of itself that was always there, again, whether we're talking about the 1970s or 2018. Just trying to make sure I'm getting to everything that I wanted to.
Yeah, and the other piece of this, that kind of the overlaying component for me, is helping 7th and 8th graders understand personal accountability, and helping set them up with good approaches and good habits in 7th and 8th grade, so that it's not such a brick wall when they hit the high school. And for some of them, I think it's been a rude awakening. And so we've had several discussions about how do we get that buy-in, how do we get them kind of ramped up to understand that the rigor is going to be there, and you can't just, if you're just squeaking by with that 2.1, you really are not prepared for high school, and we need to hold them to that level of accountability within the context of their middle school kids.
A good example, I was speaking with a student today about an 8th grader about last year's performance, and their recollection was that to them they passed all the classes. And when I looked at some of their scores, there are a couple scores below a 2, which based off of the high school grading scale would be that they failed. When I asked them what they thought passing was, they thought it was below a 1.0. So there's a really good example of the disconnect between that particular middle school student and what he thought the expectations would be in high school and what passing would be, which I think was a really good conversation to have today. questions about that before moving on? Okay. Mr. Karen.
Hi, I'm Mr. Karen, for those of you who haven't met me. So when I came in the summer, we talked about, and the law, there was a change where the law, we had a little more flexibility in the law and how the planning was going to go. We talked, Mr. Howell and I spent some time talking. We got feedback from his teaching staff, got feedback from middle school staff, and we decided that there are certain tenets that, regardless of the law, that we felt were necessary for good education. So tenets, clear and transparent learning targets, standards or targets in a proficiency model, but targets that students know, teachers know, parents know, that we can report out on. Honest feedback measured against those targets. Multiple opportunities to demonstrate learning. Clear separation of what they know. That's kind of about what Randy was talking about. Content and skill knowledge as opposed to habits of work. They're both very, very important. We think we should report out on both of them. In South Portland, we changed the transcript, so we reported habits of work right on the transcript as a part of what we were doing, so people would know this is a good worker and has strong content knowledge. We also recognize that the grading system, especially at the high school level, needs to be clear, and we need to work, be able to work all of these pieces in. So that's where at the high school we settled on a dual grading system where we report in a traditional model, a 0 to 100 scale, and we report out on standards on a 1 to 4 scale. In South Portland, where I've been for the last 5 years, we stayed everything in a 1 to 4 scale, and to try to be clear and consistent from kindergarten through the high school, and it worked wonderfully in the classroom, in the conversations. It helped in transition from middle school to high school. I spent an enormous amount of time with the end product. What does the 1 to 4 scale translate on transcripts? Does it negatively impact colleges? How are they going to look at that? We went away from credits. Colleges are still, most of the world works in a credit system. So my kind of task coming here was, how do we keep the really strong things, the transparent targets, the feedback and those things, while sharing with the greater community, parents, students, colleges, scholarship organizations, information in a manner that they're used to seeing, so that we're not taking any chances that we're going to disadvantage our kids in the way that we share information out. So we designed a dual system that's at the high school very similar to the dual system that they ran last year for freshmen. We've rolled that forward with a few tweaks we can talk about, but it is a reporting out on term grades, which are the grades for the class, in a 0 to 100 scale, with a 70 being the passing mark, earning a credit at the 70 level. But all of the work is based on these targets that are identified, clear, and then we're also reporting out on the targets specifically. So similar to, as Randy was talking, we can find, when we need to remediate, we're not remediating a subject, we're remediating a specific thing. There's an area we can, when I taught social studies, I might have a test on how, sophomore test on impact of geography on civilization, impact of philosophy and religion on civilization, impact of technology on a civilization. And a student could pass that test by knowing 2 out of 3 in the old system. And in this system, they get reported on all of them, but a teacher can go back and look and say, this student, or even better, this group of students didn't really understand how geography impacts civilization. We're going to reteach that. We're going to provide remediation. So clearer, specific feedback on this side, and then on the other side, we're not taking a chance that our reporting system is going to disadvantage kids. So that's kind of the system that we set up.
And I get all that. How can we be assured that staff is all on the same page? You're trying to align the grading, and I get that, and the students to understand what it is. But if you go into the school, the staff, the expectation in one room, how can we be assured that if I go into my English class, this is how they're reviewing me, this is how they're grading me, but if I go into my math, well, guess what? Maybe that teacher is not using the same format of grading. So can you kind of just address staff?
So at the high school, Any class that has a freshman or sophomore in that class, and additional upperclassmen classes that either the departments were ready to move into the standards-based, proficiency-based system. We set up their grade book, and we set it up on our end, and we push that information forward. So formative assessments. Formative assessments in my world and the kind of the language we're talking now are assessments that aren't at the full rigor of a summative assessment. They're the building blocks to get to. Those pieces are worth 10% of the grade, and the big assessments that are the full content of the standard are worth 90% of the grade, where last year only summatives counted, so that's a little bit of a change. But every assessment has to be connected to a standard. There can't be the unrelated bonus points or the unrelated takeaway point penalties for certain things. So we're really trying to codify how that works so that the feedback is clear, and that parents would know that if this is the grade that I'm getting, this is showing a certain level of understanding and not the kind of mismatch of what it could have meant in the past. So we're working, and then on top of that, it's the primary professional development that we're doing, working with teachers and making sure that they understand the language. I spent today at a workshop with Infinite Campus to try to figure out ways to make that reporting a little bit easier for teachers and clearer for people, for parents when they're reading that information through the portal. So we're committed to try to make that, to align those things up.
Okay, thanks.
Can I give you an example?
Sure.
So we have Algebra 1 for 8th graders, both middle schools and at the high school, for a variety of grades, I assume. So there's a common curriculum for Algebra 1, and there are also some common assessments along the way for Algebra 1. So it doesn't matter if you take it as an 8th grader at Jordan Small or you take it as a 9th grader at Wyndham High School, that content, that scope of that content knowledge is the same. You've successfully mastered Algebra 1, and you go to the next step. So that's one area where we're really tight right now. And there's probably a lot of common assessments in various schools with some content areas, but it isn't everybody everywhere yet. But common assessments help a lot.
In terms of having all the staff on the same page, I think some of the mistakes that I experienced in a previous district is when we let departments or when we let teachers sort of decide what percentage is classwork going to count, what percentage is homework going to count. What you'll see in a minute is that really we're lockstep 6 through 12 in terms of from all the little details to the amount of time that a student can retake an assessment, to the number of days they have if they are absent to make up work. And that consistency across the board makes it much easier to know whether or not staff are doing what we expect of them. And it holds everybody accountable. Kids know what the rules are, parents know what the rules are, staff know what the rules are, and everybody's on the same page. Doesn't leave any room for guessing. So,
Yes?
yes, Scott.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. From what I'm hearing, the biggest difference between high school grading and middle school grading is when it comes to academic scoring. With the high school, we're going with traditional grading, but the habits of work is still proficiency grading. Did I misunderstand that? And then the middle school is still...
So one thing that might help, we can certainly answer that for you. What we're going to do in just a second is do a side-by-side to show you what each is doing, and I think that might help to really clarify, because we haven't gotten into what the big changes are, and that will also detail even down to the smaller level what that will look like.
Okay, great, thank you.
In part of the presentation today, we wanted to make sure that the parents, the thousands of parents watching tonight, would also just make sure, right? We'll email this out too on listserv, but we want to make sure too that they don't hear about this and think that there are giant changes to what the graduation requirements are. So we just wanted Ryan to take a minute to go back over those so that they're fresh in people's minds, especially if we have parents of freshmen that are watching tonight or that are interested in this.
So you've got the graduation requirements here. So we're still a credit-based system where our students are earning 22 credits, and they have to have 4 credits of English, 4 credits of mathematics, and you can see, I won't read through the list. So course credit is awarded for demonstrating proficiency on graduation standards by achieving an overall course grade of 70. So the course grade is made up of primarily summative assessments, 90%, and 10% formative assessments. All of those are tied to the graduation targets that have been assigned to the courses, and that's where that's where the credits come. And we have the demonstration of computer proficiency, and this year we have the completion of the capstone project for seniors. And for those parents who are watching, Friday I'll be sending out information on the capstone to parents. We're going to share some new information with seniors on Friday as well. Any questions at all about the graduation requirements?
How, I just need clarity on how you're demonstrating computer proficiency. How is that being demonstrated?
How are we graduating?
So, computer proficiency, let's go, actually, computer proficiency. Can I take this? I know something about it. Computer proficiency, when it was first introduced in the law in the early 90s, was basic computer proficiency, which was the ability to turn on a computer, the ability to actually manage all the peripherals that go along with it. And then over time, it started to take a little bit of a life of its own. And at one point in this district, it was actually Microsoft Office certification was computer proficiency. So the pendulum went from a basic computer proficiency all the way over to showing Microsoft Office. So there was a group that worked together probably 2 or 3 years ago and looked at a progression of learning that took place throughout the middle levels with things that students would be doing their computers to show that basic proficiency. And now even with the high school being a one-to-one, some of the project basis that happened throughout the course of the high school would then lead to that. So computer happens over time, but it goes back to the original segment of the law back in the late 90s, which when computers were a novelty, and we had computer labs. I don't know if anyone remembers a computer lab, or the old days where you had one computer per classroom, where the labs didn't even exist. It was that students would have the opportunity to use a computer and understand the basic functions of it.
I guess where I'm a little confused is back in the day, it was, as you described, in the high school. And then it was shifted to the middle school. The middle school was going to be the place where proficiency, and so now, where does the buck stop? Is it the middle?
The high school can accept what's considered to be mental proficiency that's coming out of the middle level. There's no description in the law that actually says how that is actually be measured, and it's left up to every individual district to determine how they're going to actually figure out what computer proficiency is.
So do we have that figured out?
We do. We have a document that you had done with Christine, Drew, probably 2 or 3 years ago, which we'd be happy to share.
I think it's important because we spend so much money on computers that what does this mean, demonstration of computer proficiency?
I think what's different, Kate, is that it's not a test or an assessment that kids are taking, but rather an assurance that as we look at the skills and what they're exposed to through their middle school years, that we're hitting all of those, from being able to do a Keynote project to an Excel file to word processing to creating content on the web.
So when they leave you lads and they get to this fella, they're going to be proficient.
Yeah, I mean, every student who's gone through Jordan Small has done multiple presentations using various formats, Keynote, PowerPoints, those types of things. They're doing word processing in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade on a regular basis. So, I mean, I guess the target of proficiency always moves because the computers get more sophisticated, you can do more with them, but all those basic functions are now they're just embedded in what we do. I mean, they're on the web, they're off the web,
It's embedded in the curriculum that they do. If they do the curriculum and they're in a passing grade, they're meeting this.
Right. They have to use the tool for the assignments in order to pass the class.
Right.
So I remember when one of my daughters was in 3rd grade going to school and watching, I can't remember the night of it, but they all had like famous Maine people that they were doing presentations on.
Yeah, 4th
and
grade,
sitting in
probably.
the 4th grade class watching my daughter give a PowerPoint presentation, and I was like, what's PowerPoint? So it's really is cool to see how it's just it's part of what they do, but I think being able to see that document would just that would be very helpful for people that don't get to go see the famous Maine people presentations.
We'll get that to you. Okay to move on?
Okay.
Great. So, getting into the changes, this will help address, I think, some of Scott's questions. So one of the changes, this is the current trend for the high school, is that if we think about back to some of our years of schooling, you had a fresh start every quarter. So that'll be the same for the middle schools, is that the grading periods will be set up on quarters for both Jordan Small and Wyndham Middle School. And at the start of each quarter, there's sort of the clean slate. Prior to that, Jump Rope really collected scores on a year-long progression. So this will give it, again, more of that high school feel, more of that, well, I had a 2.5 in science first quarter, now I'm gonna be able to have a separate grade. Those quarters get averaged just like the high school does at the end of the year, and they'll get a final grade. One of the challenges is just in using the Jump Rope platform is it's not quite set up to do the same things that Infinite Campus can do, and we'll talk about that, where the district is probably heading in terms of the grading platform. But for right now, we're at Jump Rope for the middle schools and Infinite Campus for the high schools. Students have a grade conversion, so at the high school, again, they have graduation standards are reported out on a 1 through 4 scale, and then they have course grades. For Jump Rope, if one of you with your children open up Jump Rope today and look at that, you might look at science, and it might say a 3.0 for science, and then it gives in parentheses what the grade conversion is based off of the high school scale, which is an 87%. Make sense so far? So that's kind of that dual reporting, that students see scores in a 1 through 4 scale, and then there's a conversion over to a 0 to 100 scale.
I didn't see that. I actually, because I logged in as soon as I got the email from Jump Rope, and I immediately emailed the teacher because I was like, why does my daughter have a 2.5 in something?
So if Jump Rope, if scores haven't been input, then one thing that you'll see, and is good for the viewers, is that it reverts back to scores from last year. So that could be it, but I can look at that for you.
Okay.
And sometimes Jump Rope can be a little testy, and as we go through, we're trying to get those kinks worked out.
Okay.
So one of the changes is standards are averaged at the middle school level as opposed to what's called decaying average. So if you had 2 assessments for the same standard, previously the more recent assessment counted more. We could get into the mathematical formula about that, but it wasn't what was called straight averaged, where if I had 100 on one of the assessments and a 75 on the 50 on the other one, that the average would be a 75. Or if I had a 4 and a 2, the average wouldn't have been a 3. In this case, it would be. So that's another significant change. Again, everything with the lens of what does the high school do, so that the fewer amount of changes, that we, very simplistically, the better we think that students will adjust. Classwork and homework, this is also a change for the high school, where formatives, and if you think of formatives, the best way to think about that in our own terms is classwork. So these are things that are done in class. It might be homework, it might be it might be a small quiz, it might be just an assignment that needed to be completed in that class period. Is what we want to do is put a little more teeth in that. Again, the middle school brain thinks, oh, that doesn't really count for much, and if that doesn't really count for much, why do I have to do that? And that there was a lot of feedback from parents about that, where they struggled at home with trying to get their students to buy into completing homework, because the students say, well, it only counts for 0.01% of my grade, Mom or Dad, so I don't really need to do it. So that idea of practice to be able to perform in the big game, while we tried to sell that as much as we could, that was something harder for students to be able to grasp. So at both levels, we've gone to 10% of the course grade is related to the classwork, and 90% of the course grade is related to tests, big tests, if you think of it that way, which can also be, that's changed a little bit over the past 10 years, or even longer than that, in terms of providing alternatives to just a straight paper and pencil test. This might be a project, this might be some type of presentation, it might be some web content that they create. It varies a little bit, but that's, if you think about it in that manner, classwork and tests, 10%, 90%. Marge?
Okay, this is a simple question coming from a very simple mind at this point in time. But if 90% of my mark is going to be my tests and major projects, why in the world would I do my homework when I can, if I can ace? Does this mean if I ace my test and I ace my projects, that if I never did a lick of homework, I would get a 90?
So
Just a
again,
question.
right. So what we try to do is with, based off of what we all experienced as schooling, like the example that Randy gave, is that B- didn't really give us a lot of information about the difference between habits of work. Does a student turn in homework? Do they use class time wisely? Do they complete classwork? And what their academic ability is. So this would still be able to separate that out. So yes, theoretically, you could have a student that aces all of their tests and has a 90% for that course and still passes it, still is in good standing. However, habits of work would look very different than that. One of the things that I do like to look at is if a student isn't successful, as we go to look at their habits of work. Very rarely do you find a student that isn't being successful and their habits of work are outstanding. That would tell us that there's more of an issue with learning that we need to take a look at to provide more support with that, rather than work with them on executive functioning skills, organization, managing class time wisely. So that helps us in terms of diagnosing what issues might be with kids and how to better support them. Without that information, to some extent, you don't really have anything to base that off of. Shooting in the dark a little bit, you could always ask the teacher, how's Marge doing in class? Oh, she aces all the tests, but she doesn't turn any of her homework in. This helps to give us that information and parents that information as well. Did I answer the question for you?
It does. Be very different. I doubt if anybody who's going to ace anything never turns anything in, but it was just, like I said, a simple question.
And the flip-flop of that is, if you see habits of work that's outstanding, and the student is struggling every time they're
They have a
assessed,
problem.
and they can't, that's a different conversation. We need to find a different program for them, or we need to find some intervention, some support, so we can disaggregate that better than just saying, well, they passed, they got a 75, so I guess they're okay. Well, no, they're not. They need help.
It takes away from that, what some people experience. I know I experienced as a teacher, is you had the student that tried really, really hard, was well-behaved in class, did the best they could, turned everything in, and they might have a higher score that isn't necessarily indicative of what they're academically capable of. All right. Let me see. Give me 1 second to transition this over to the table. So I'll run through these, if that's all right, just to show some of the differences. These are not it doesn't show past and present. It really shows what the current structure is. So system of reporting, jump rope for middle schools, infinite campus, the way of reporting, and if you, hopefully what you see out of this is really the alignment. That's really the purpose. Some of this will answer some of the specific questions that you might have about how homework is scored and late work policies and retakes and those types of things. Dual system, 100-point scale for courses at the middle school. 1 through 4 is how we report out on the assessments at the high school. 100-point scale for courses, and 1 through 4 for graduation standards. Averaging is the same. The grades reset at the end of every quarter, and the quarters are averaged to get a final grade at the end of the year. Length of grading period, we talked about that. Quarters, guiding principles, which is not necessarily they don't get a score specifically for it. That's not a course, but we report out those by content areas at the middle school, and then report it out by course at the high school. So some similarities there. The weighting, which we thought was really critical. We didn't want a big change to happen where finally they get to the high school and suddenly things are now weighted that weren't before. So again, we're in line with the weighting of that. We separate out habits of work scores for academic responsibility and social responsibility. Previously, the middle schools gave feedback on 4 areas of habits of work, and again, in the spirit of alignment, to make things simple for kids and known as they go from 8th grade to 9th grade, they're receiving feedback on the same things for habits of work. The assessment retake policy. So again, this is where providing consistency for all staff, K-12, that within 2 weeks a student can retake an assessment, provided their formatives have been completed. We've gotten into a bit of a culture, especially with middle school students, where they roll in for a test, and then Eric, before he even takes the test, says, when can I retake this? So what we wanted to do was put some more teeth in that, so that students had to complete the formatives. They needed to complete those pieces of work before they would be allowed to retake a test. And that, like in the real world, there's a time limit on when they can do that. We had kids that were saying, I want to retake this assessment that happened in September, and we're already in the new year. So we wanted to really tighten up on that. Again, consistent middle school to high school. They don't have to learn a new system once they go across the road or drive down. Homework, so homework is scored as a formative if it counts as a formative as long as it is scored homework. So we can think of homework in two different cases. This is my class. I've asked you to simply bring something back. I want you to write a sentence about an animal that you saw on your way home. That is just, did you complete it or did you not, is different than I gave you 10 math problems and I'm scoring you for accuracy on those. So if it's scored for accuracy, that counts towards the formative. If it's not, that becomes part of habits of work. So I can see if Kate is turning in all of her homework that's asked. And it can actually lie in both places for teachers. They have the choice of that. Some teachers do more with habits of work to provide more of a profile about all, they might have every single homework assignment in there. Some teachers might have more of a collection for the week. Janie was able to turn in 7 out of 8.
8 out of 8, man.
Sorry, I'm picking on people tonight. Late work, very similarly, again in line with. It's pretty similar. The high school has some differences in that, but I think it's close enough as far as we can with the systems that we have. So essentially, it's completed within 2 weeks of the assigned date. The high school, I don't know, Ryan, if you mind explaining kind of your version of that.
So they have the 2 weeks, but they can't reach a 4 level on something. Unfair real world consequences. There's probably been additional instruction that's taken place. So if a student chooses not to turn in an assignment on time, then they've got additional instruction and they've got additional time, then they can, and then they turn it in, they do better than the rest of the class when there's been another lesson on that. We don't feel that that's fair, so there's a cap there. On the term grade, which is the part that gets reported out, if a student shows excellence on the target level because we're truly dual, or we're not a conversion, in a pure conversion the way the middle schools are, a teacher could say this student is now a 4 on this target, but still put in the 3 for the term grade. So the grade is affected in a way that shows that little piece of what's fair, and we really want to be super clear on what they know when we report out on the targets. So that's the difference there.
Makeup work, go ahead, Scott.
So I guess I was going to ask for Drew and Randy, why did you guys feel like you didn't want to kind of follow that same footsteps?
For me, I think it's just a little more rigid for a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old. And I know. I mean, this is a step in the right direction. Let's see if it works. Because we experienced a lot of the problem that Drew was describing, which is, well, in a proficiency-based model, and they figured this out. Some are pretty smart, smarter than me sometimes. So proficiency-based model, you're going to give me an infinite amount of time to master the standard. So I'll just take my time getting there because it's human nature for some of us who procrastinate. So we started putting in last year, doing small requirements around retakes or how much time you get to do that makeup. If that doesn't work this year, I think we'd probably go back to the drawing board and say, do we need to tighten this up and even more? And I don't find it to be a problem so much with 5th and 6th graders. They're pretty willing to please and relatively compliant about what's expected, but teenagerness sets in, and so we'll see.
The other way to think about it too, most late work, what we're talking about is classwork, which tends to be a formative, which oftentimes there's not an option for a 4 on a formative. So if I didn't do that, that worksheet or that, whatever that was during that class period, and I turn it in later, if I do well on it, then I'm going to have a 3 in the first place. Typically with summatives, that's something that you're doing within that period of time for the class, and so it's right there. And so unless you're absent, in which case the absent policy would apply. So makeup work, again, consistent with that, where if someone misses 2 days of school, they have an additional 2 days to make that up, and that's really the guarantee. We always look at case by case with students and their circumstances, but we're not going to pull the rug out and say, well, Sandy missed 5 days, but you really only have one to get this done. Course credit, as you know, I think this also is a bit of a bridge, not the conversation to have tonight, but when we look at accountability for middle school students, what can we do to remediate them if they're not meeting standards, and what is the accountability if they're not ready to go on to the high school? And again, not to start that conversation, but this is the step in the right direction to be able to frame that, and that would be continued work probably with the policy committee and also between the high schools and middle schools and central office about those next steps. Eligibility, we have policies at both schools about eligibility. The eligibility policy at the middle school was new last year. I think both Randy and I felt that was successful in students keeping track of, keeping in mind what the obligations are to be able to play school sports, used as a motivator, and also helped us to remediate students and support them if they needed that support. And the report card format, Randy and I, there's only one version at the high school, so Randy and I are also just agreed to be consistent with what our version is between Jordan Small and Wyndham Middle School. Scott, was that helpful in terms of some of the specifics for you? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Just a question on weighting, and this rollout, is it happening right now?
Yep. So
for everybody or just freshmen? Because I just wanted to understand that the seniors
freshmen, any class that has a freshman or a sophomore enrolled in it. And sorry. Any class that has a freshman or a sophomore enrolled in it. And then other departments that were ready that had their targets aligned and were ready to move in this direction. World languages are in that system. The classes that are out are following guidelines around habits of work don't count in the grade, and they're still setting up their own calculations, but we're working with them to move in this direction to prepare for the next year and then the full implementation.
So current seniors will only have the 0 to 100% grading.
Correct, unless they're in a world language course, or so at the high school it's a little bit different because it's based on where they fall in a much bigger curriculum. So we have seniors that are in Algebra 2, and if a senior's in an Algebra 2 class, we have freshmen that are in pre-calculus. So if they're there, then it's going to be assessed in that model. So there will be some classes, and then the arts classes aren't quite there with their targets yet, so you could have, so they wouldn't have those standards. So juniors and seniors they're always going to have the term grade. They are sometimes going to have the term grade and the graduation standard in their report card. And then next year, it'll be very rare, even if the plan is to continue, and we'll discuss, to roll one more year with junior classes in, it'll be a very rare senior who has a class that doesn't have that, outside of the AP courses, where we'll follow the AP audits for their curriculum.
Okay, and the only other question is the weighting. I know that before, that if you were in the high school and you were in honors, that it was weighted a little bit.
So this isn't the weighting in reporting of grades. This is the weighting in the teacher's grade book. Mm-hmm. So that is how it's a little bit different. It's not as much classwork and big assessments as it kind of is in the middle school. It's formative are the steps on the way to the big thing. Okay. And the summative assessment is the target. What's their understanding of the target? So that's where we settled with 90-10, because we want to make sure that we're not leading people that can do pieces of the big thing to believe that they can do the full, they can demonstrate the full target by having higher weight for the steps along the way. 90-10, we felt, gave us an opportunity to hold kids accountable to doing the preparatory work, to value those students who do get the pieces along the way. But we want to be really clear when we report out that if we're saying a student really knows this, they know it. Because I know with the relationship I had with Southern Maine Community College right down the road from South Portland, a lot of kids, not just South Portland kids, Wyndham kids, Southern Maine kids, are going to university with pretty good GPAs and then having to take remedial courses. Right. And we really want to report out what students know, and we want to provide the remediation we need to provide while they're at the high school where it's guaranteed to everybody, and not at the next level where they have to pay extra. Every time they have to pay extra, that decreases their opportunity to graduate on time. So that's why we really want to be focused on clear targets, clear feedback, consistent communication of where kids are.
Okay. Is there any weighting though for these honors classes? And
In
I
the-
just
in the-
wanted to
in
know
the-
if that went
In the
away.
determination for the class ranking and the GPA,
Okay.
there's a weight for the more rigorous classes.
Okay.
Not in the daily reporting on the report card, not in what
Yeah.
you're seeing, but in our sharing out, students do get a benefit for taking a more rigorous course load.
Yeah.
Which is then recalculated by whatever school receives it. So the schools have our weighting, they recalculate it down to a level to do a
they-
comparison. So
yeah.
really, it's only used for class rank at Wyndham High School.
Class rank, honor societies, things like that. Different colleges will look at, some schools only look at core classes, some schools, if you're going into a math and science program, will only look at your math and science grades, and they're not really interested in your arts and this. Some schools take everything, and then they use their own weighting system. So we have a weighting system to make sure that the kids who are pushing themselves are benefited. But it's not the long-term benefit is more based on, do our kids know what we say they know, and what's the overall reputation of our schools? So colleges look at our schools and say, our kids are consistently strong kids, and we're going to apply a weighting that is that relays that information.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, and this has been good. Not that I understand it all, but it's been good. But my question is, how do you get all this information across to the students and more important, to the parents who are not in the schools and get the report card home? I mean,
I was just
how is
about to go through
that
that.
training going on? Sure.
So the parents have the information in terms of, Randy and I have both communicated out on listserv. We don't even begin to believe that that's enough. So part of it is that initial information, the information that we have tonight. A beautiful segue into a continued conversation about this a week from today at 6 o'clock at the Wyndham High School auditorium, where we will be presenting the same information but available to answer more detailed questions. The invite will be coming on listserv shortly.
That's really great, because I get everybody's listserv,
Yep.
because I have grandkids in all the schools.
So it
And
has
I've read
to-
them, and it's not enough.
It has to come out multiple times for people to start to know that. From my standpoint, and I know that Randy has, part of that is on the ground with teachers. So in the classroom, embedded, when we're talking about, today we're going to have a summative. We have to remember that this counts for 90% of the grade. Today, this is a formative. It counts for 10% of the grade. To make it embedded, it's multiple conversations with parents. It's conferences will be a really good opportunity to have our teachers one-on-one to be able to review that and be able to explain the grading system to parents. I think one of the challenges with the previous grading system, it was hard to explain. To explain decaying average to someone that doesn't have a mathematical mind like myself, I can't. It's difficult to do that. So I say, well, that one counted more than that one. Okay, I kind of get that. And part of this is we don't want parents to tune out, because we know that parents are also the key in helping their child's progress, having really critical conversations with them about their performance. And if they're not able to understand what the grading system is, that puts us at a disadvantage as well, because we don't want them to get frustrated and give up. So I think this grading system, we really feel, keeps with many of the tenets that we feel are best for educating kids, but also can relate to a level based off of people's previous school experiences, in terms of when we talk about classwork and in quarters and refreshing things. It tends to be more of an experience that they've had themselves, which is easier to be able to communicate that to their children. Did that answer help a little bit, Marge? It's going to take time.
Yeah,
and I just
'cause
wanted
it's more
to-
because I bump into a lot of parents, and it's like, you know what, I don't understand this at all. Of course, I can't explain it. It's kind of like, well, why don't you go and talk to the teacher? But one of the other things I get is, well, yeah, but I get different answers depending on what teacher I talk to, and I think that's a problem. That's why I had asked earlier about having everybody on staff on the same page, because I think it's very difficult when a parent goes in and sees one teacher and says, okay, this is how it works, blah, 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 and then they go see one of their other children's teachers, and it's like, oh, well, wait a minute, the other teacher told me it worked this way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm looking for some uniformity in how the message gets out there, and that it's the same, and that they're doing it the same.
Yeah, so last year I sent out a survey for Jordan Small parents, and about half of the parents did the survey, which I thought was pretty good. And so there, I think, are 18 or 19, 20 questions. The one that got the most comments of the greatest length was about grading and reporting, which was kind of a wake-up call for me that, okay, we've been doing this now for 8 or 9 years. People are still not happy with it. They're confused by it. And we're not always clear about how all those calculations happen, you know, without Mr. Patton's, you know, magic mathematical mind, which, you know, anyway. We'll discuss that later. But the point being that I showed this to the folks that came to open house at Jordan Small. I talked about it. They got a copy of it. And some of them were like, thank you. Sounds like now maybe I can understand this thing. Or they were like, oh, this sounds good. So, I mean, it's for them. Grading and reporting is mostly for the parents. And so we need to make it work for them.
I have just a question, and I may have misunderstood you, but you had said homework can only be graded out of 3, essentially, right?
So essentially, oftentimes there may not be 4s available,
Okay.
and we recognize that it's going to be challenging. At the same time, I think that the bar that's been set based off of the conversion scale, which
That's
I
my
can
question.
Yep, that I can go down in here and look at.
You're reading my mind.
I am reading your mind, yeah. So the way that we looked at that is formatives may not have the opportunity for a 4. Some of them don't lend themselves to that. At the same time, this was some dialogue that we've had fairly recently about, you know, how do we move forward with this. We also believe, though, that at the middle school level, the summatives, after there are some summatives, that the mathematical calculation, it will not it's not going to overly penalize students. It's a 4 will be a challenge for kids.
So could they technically, and again, this gets back to your Marge's perfect world example.
Yep.
If a student gets all 3s on their homework
Yep.
and gets
All 4s.
all 4s and 100, they technically can't average out to.
Their mathematical, it may come out to a 3.9, and again, right around that high percentage average. It's a challenge because we also don't want to make, given the current system, and again, we're looking ahead, looking to really adopt Infinite Campus and those types of gradings as an intermediary step. At the middle school level, we don't have class rank. We're not talking about creating a transcript that's going to determine whether or not a student is valedictorian at the middle school. Whereas at the high school, that would be much more of a concern based off of the way that they currently do class rank.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay. Thank
Pete?
you.
Sure.
Yeah, and that leads into my question. And I understand that this is a presentation more geared towards how we do the grading and getting consistency. But this whole time I've been sitting here thinking, what are we doing to push our students past the 3?
Mhm.
And, you know, so maybe that's a conversation for a different time.
Oh, I'm ready.
Because, I mean, part of what made our country so successful for so long is just that drive to be great and the competition. And I think back to when I was in school, and I don't want to say, you know, back in those days, but I remember having those few classmates where it was just constant competition between us to see who's going to get the better grade, who's going to do better on the test, who's going to end the semester with a better grade in that particular class. And that's something that I just don't see right now. And I'm wondering, like, it seems like we're getting our kids to a 3, that's our goal, and then if they want to do more beyond that, but I don't know, I just...
So the expectation at both the middle schools is that for some of it is that all the students have an opportunity to earn a 4, that the rubric is clear about what it takes to earn a 4, and that students are provided the instruction in order to get to a 4. And so that would be the first step, is making sure that it's accessible to all, and it's not just offered here and there in this class, but not in the other class. So that would be the first piece. I'm not sure that that's a problem that's necessarily new, in my opinion, is that I think if we set the bar high and students have the ability to achieve that, we're going to have to push some kids to that. We're going to have to encourage them. That's parental support as well. Some kids are going to strive for that on their own. But my experience at a middle school or junior high wasn't about class rank, because we didn't have that then. The competition does become more in play when students get to the high school, and grades don't carry over. So if they had a bad 8th grade year, they can start fresh their freshman year, and be able to get into that. You know what I mean? Looking to build the transcript, and so I don't know if that's the difference between middle school and high school. I don't disagree with you about wanting that healthy competition, wanting to have kids strive, but I don't know if that helped to answer the question.
Well, it does, but I mean, if we're trying to prepare our kids so that the transition is smoother and they're more prepared for what high school is going to be like, I mean, starting to instill those work habits of pushing beyond the 3. It's not okay to just, all right, I'm at the standard.
So one thing that Randy and I really want to do with fall conferences is look at what is backwards plan. So if you're in an 8th grade conference with teachers and you're talking about with your child about what expectations are for high school, and here are what the opportunities are. Here's what an academic class looks like. Here's what an honors class looks like. Here's how you get into AP Bio. Then what we can do is start to backwards plan. And so if I'm a science teacher and I know that the child's pathway is that they want to be in AP Bio, then I can start working backwards about here are the expectations. Here's how we're going to push you so that you can get that. The expectation is you have to take advantage of all the 4s. You have to take advantage of we do some extra classes around AP Bio preparation, but that would be part of the idea, is getting a sense of what it is students want when their freshman year, and then looking back at how do we get to that level. And again, people have different plans. We have students that their goal is to get into vocational school, which might be a bit of a different track than someone that's saying, look, I want to go to Yale, and I want this type of transcript.
Yeah, and the other piece for me is I think this conversion scale is going to be a little bit of a wake-up call, and there's the purest philosophical part of me about what I think proficiency-based should always be, but then there's the human nature side, which is what you're sort of describing. I'm going to kind of get by with what I need to get by unless you tell me the bar's higher. So in the old days, I had a kid who was very good at computing his grade average and could come out around 70 or 71 all the time, and then decide if he was going to make the effort the next week or not. He had that standard down. But so, a 2.5 on this scale is like an 80 or an 81.
It's like an 80. It's
just like an 80. See, you are the mathematical guy. But a lot of kids right now, I think, 7th and 8th graders would be, I got a 2.5. That's good. And then you think, yeah, but if that was in the high school right now, you get an 80. And then the parents go, an 80? I'm not satisfied with it. So I think part of it is the language. And a 3 it's hard to get a 3 in some of the standards. I mean, it's pretty rigorous. And it's not like a 3 is less than where we want you to be. A 3 is where we want you to be. And then we give you some headroom. So, we're walking both worlds here a little bit. Trying to push a little bit more and increase that rigor, but still be standards-based.
I see, excuse me, I'm sorry. Okay. But I agree with you. I see where that's going to go backwards. Because we were always told as board or parents that 3 was the thing, and there was going to be these different pathways, and there was going to be, which I'm not saying I'm all for, but that doesn't exist. So we may need to relook at our strategic plan at some point, because that's not going to be what we have. It's not a 3 or you keep working till you get to 3. That's what we were originally, a couple of years back on Proficiency, that's what we were told.
Well, I think it's that. Yeah, I think it's that, but it's also, I'm still working on my 3, and it's taking me a little longer, and I'm having a hard time getting everything. But you're ready for the next thing, so you're going for the 4, and you're challenging yourself to do that. And we're going to help you. We're going to push you.
What classes do that?
More so in 8th grade. I'm just speaking for
That's
Jordan.
your school, okay.
I'm speaking for Jordan Small, science is more of those challenges. ELA, if you want to get a 4, this is what it looks like. But we're not there yet. I'm not going to tell you we are. I mean, and I have some teachers who struggle with it. Some things there is no 4. You just go to a new standard. Right. You finish this one, you go to another standard. Right. And so it's not a simple issue, but we're working on it.
And I just wanted to jump on what Pete said a little bit, because I feel that the bar sometimes challenges kids in 7th or 8th grade. And we used to have like honor roll, and so kind of speak to if that plays in, if there is an honor roll at the middle school. Because there is at the high school, and maybe
There is, and I personally, I think that's a bigger debate. Sometimes honor roll is also, gives you an indication of who doesn't have the grades. There's another way to look at that, is that if the honor roll is indicative of what students scored, it also is indicative of who didn't score that. And I again, I'm not saying that I support it or don't support it. I feel like that's a bigger conversation if that's, you know, again, if that's what the board or my bosses ask us to work on in terms of how do we create more of that healthy competition and push kids. I think there are some ways to do that. There's some ways that might be of a concern to parents or teachers. I'm not sure.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I think that should be a topic for another day.
I'm, got it right here.
I think it's important.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, you ready to go into the, are you finished with the?
I'm good.
Okay.
Personally.
Well, I didn't know if you wanted to go through it.
We certainly can, and so this just has a conversion scale on there. A 4 is 100%. You know, what we thought of the 3 previously turns out to be an 86.7 or an 87. So again, if Scott's looking at if we've got that right in jump rope, if his child sees a 3, then right next to it in parentheses for that course grade would be an 87%. We get down to this level here, and really a 2 converts to about a 73%, and then when we get to below a 2, you're right at that 70%. And so again, that's that cutoff for sports eligibility as well.
So 70 you can play or 70 you can't play?
70 is the floor of the passing grade. So when this scale
That's how I
was,
interpreted it. I was just curious.
yeah, when this scale was instituted last year, the 73 became the bottom of the passing grades, and we found that it was too confusing for families and students and even teachers to have the freshmen have one score be their cut, and then the rest of the students have a different score. So we moved back to the 70 this year. That'll be continued discussion around students should. I wouldn't be excited if a student had a 1.75 average, and that was across the board. But I think for clarity's sake, to be consistent, especially as we're rolling this into the high school year by year, it made more sense with policy. I mean, the policy was around passing classes for eligibility, the different things that we used the floor for. It made sense to us to say 70 is the bottom of passing, and we can we'll look at that again as everybody rolls into the system.
Is that the same with middle school?
It is. So, and just a reminder about that too, if we have a student that has a 20%, things are kind of set in stone for that quarter in terms of eligibility. Somebody that's at a 68 or a 69%, we would go through the probationary period with the student and really working on a plan to get their grade to where it needs to be, so that they're able, that again, that's that part of the policy to encourage them, get the grades up to where they need to be. So you have to cut it off at some point. So again, for us, we're looking at when the end of first quarter rolls out, I have to go through all the grades, just plug in a number and say, look, 69 and below, show me the kids, and let's start meeting with them. Let's cross-reference that with kids that are signed up for sports and go from there. But it has to be some cutoff.
Yep.
So, Drew and Randy, do you guys have some sort of an action plan kind of put together to show the kids, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders this model right here? Do you have some sort of communication? I know that you had mentioned that you were going to be doing a presentation at the high school auditorium for the parents, but I'm wondering if it would benefit the kids if they actually physically saw this information as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
That might drive
and just
that
to be
competitive nature that
right,
we're
it might.
talking about.
And just to be clear, like the middle school teachers are still scoring 1 to 4 against the standards.
Yep.
Jump rope is making the conversion based on how we set it up to convert it.
Mhm.
So even though they may have heard about it, the reality I don't think has settled in yet because they haven't been looking at jump rope because there isn't a lot to look at. So when they start, then they'll start seeing it. So I think, we'll be explaining it as we go and at Jordan Small in terms of helping them understand what's that other number there. Because these kids, unless they moved from somewhere else that had a traditional system, have always had 1 to 4. They don't know anything else. So I think it's less of a shift on the ground than it feels like,
I typically do more work with 8th graders in terms of that transition. Kids last year were meeting Chris for the first time in, like in January, the first week in January to really start that transition. I'd anticipate doing the same thing. Just keep in mind though, like human brain in terms of hearing something auditorily, 7 times it's going to take a lot, and that's where I really think the onus is on the teachers' day-to-day practice about what these expectations are, really talking about the alignment between, especially as an 8th grader, where, hey, next year, this is the same as it's going to be next year. Starting to use terminology that you failed this course. We have to be real with students about if this were the high school, you would not be receiving course credit right now. And I think that's a piece that we're missing because of the common language and the differences between the grading at middle school and high school.
Yeah, I've had multiple grandchildren go from the middle school into the high school, and as the years have gone by, and that was the biggest thing. The biggest thing was it's a culture shock when you go to the high school because this is not middle school. There is not this one teacher who really loves me and gives me all this extra time and reminds me she's a teacher, and all of a sudden it's like you are one of a lot of people and you are just totally lost. And I think you and I have had that conversation that the kids need to be better prepared. So doing things at your school that complement what happens at high school, I think is the best thing that we could ever do for our students. The parents might not quite get it yet because it's complicated if you're not in the middle of it. I mean, if it's complicated for us and we don't live and breathe it like you guys do, but we're more familiar with it than Sally out there who has kids in school but does not go to school board meetings and, maybe doesn't go to too many parent-teacher conference or any of those that you have. For them, it's like, this is like, oh my God, it's like moving to another country because we change so frequently. So I think it's great that you're finally taking some of that and moving it down to the middle school because I think the earlier they're exposed to what's going to happen when they get there, there'll be a little bit more of a comfort level than being thrown in. It's like being thrown into that big tiger pit. It's scary.
I don't know.
I'm calling you a tiger pit now.
Well, thank you. I want to say something a little bit on the opposite of that. Talking to a bunch of soccer freshmen and sophomores, they said that they felt that it's not as bad as the scary things that the 7th and 8th grade teachers said about it. They're like kind of relieved, like, this isn't that bad. So just keep it.
It happens at every transition. Middle school has always been a scary one for people.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any other board comments? Do we have any comments from the public about this? Okay, well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, I need a motion about standing rules, please.
I move to approve the RSU 14 School Board 2018-19 standing rules.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Can we explain to the public so they know what standing rules are, just in case they don't?
Especially where we're sitting.
Okay. Okay, yes, I think briefly we can say that the standing rules are rules that govern how the school board works. And there aren't any up for you, but it just tells about how the people in the board will behave and the protocols that we have about open communication and orders of motion and Robert's rules and things like that. So, any other discussion?
Are these available to see anywhere online?
I'm not sure. Are these available online?
I don't believe so, but that's a
Okay,
pretty
but
good idea.
we can put them online on the board tab and the,
Are they part of the attachments though for the agenda
Well,
that's
I was
online?
wondering.
they,
Because that was on the
I didn't know
board,
if that was for us,
RSU
if that's
14.
for-
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I don't know if the attachment goes to the public, though.
You can add it to the
Oh,
website.
yeah, I can't tell.
okay, so I guess not.
No, it didn't.
So we can put them on there, so, okay. So it's been moved and seconded, and we've had discussions. All those in favor? Any opposed? Oh, I voted yes.
So you
The
did
motion
vote.
carries. Okay. So the next item we have is, I'd like a motion for the tobacco use and possession policy, please.
I move to approve the revisions to the tobacco use and possession policy, file code ADC, which was not on there yet.
So this-
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Mrs. Brooks?
Thank you. We revised this on June 6, 2018, and since that time, Mr. Rossetti and high school staff were approached by Be the Influence and Maine Health Prevention Services, and they reviewed our policy. And they advised that if we made a few additions, which you see in your packet that are highlighted in yellow, that we would be eligible for some signage. And the signs could be street signs, building signs, or even little window clings. So as you can see, both changes occurred in the very first paragraph, and all school-owned or leased/rented vehicles just tightens up this policy. And then the other addition was where one might get some help if you needed help to stop smoking. And that's the final little highlighted thing there.
What's the signage?
What is the signage? What is it saying?
Yeah.
I don't know. But
We
Chris
got it.
does.
It's basic signage on tobacco-free zone, it's basic signage on, no smoking around the building. So just basically some ways to get out the message that all of our campuses are smoke-free and vape-free and anything that's used to ingest or use tobacco or nicotine or other products, which for anyone now in Maine under the age of 21, as of July 1st, it's illegal for them to possess and use.
Kate, can I just ask you procedurally what we're doing here? Because I'm used to like first readings and second readings, and this is worded
Because
as
this
a...
is such a minimal change, it's not really substantial.
Okay.
We're doing a revision. If the board wishes, we can do a first and second reading, but this, as quickly as we get it on the books, is as quickly as the motion.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with this. It's just
Okay.
something
Yeah.
unfamiliar to me, so
Right,
I'd like
right.
clarity.
We had,
We've done it before with revisions.
but we had a discussion about it at the policy meeting and felt because it was so minimal.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
I have
Yes,
a
sir.
question for Kate. The back section here, other persons in violation of this cross the policy. I will say this personally, it drives me absolutely crazy to see other people, parents, smoking on school property, which
Yep.
is kind of more of a concern for me. Isn't that actually against the law? Because my question here is, the police may be called and the offender may be charged with criminal trespassing. Isn't there technically something else?
There's a Maine state law, it's right here, it doesn't give which one it is, but it says they will be informed of the Maine state law and RSU's tobacco-free policy. So there has to be, we just, it's not referenced here, that's all.
Well, there is
Is
a
it
legal
down below?
reference.
Yeah.
There are
Down
legal
below.
references
Yeah.
down below.
Scott, if you're directing the question down this, I would have to look at which specifically in Maine statute where it talks about,
That's-
it would be where smoking under in public places, but I'm not familiar enough with that particular title. But you and your policy have the ability to set what rules that you want to have on your campus, one of which is that it's a smoke-free facility. And to the extent that, and just in my former life as a high school principal and having to address people at public events and soccer games and football games and other events to say, we're a smoke-free campus is something that we did or had law enforcement do.
Okay.
But
I
if
was-
somebody refuses to, then you also have the illegal ability to have somebody trespass from your facility to say, you're not welcome back unless you can comply by the rules and regulations that have been set forth by the board.
It struck me as odd that would be what they would be charged, is criminal trespassing. They wouldn't be charged with an actual statute that says you're in violation of smoking on main school property subsection, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, let us do a little digging and see if we can find a citation for you and get back to you on that.
Okay.
Okay, we've moved and seconded, and we've had discussion. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. Could I have a motion on the shared vehicle maintenance facility interlocal agreement, please?
I move to approve an interlocal agreement for the vehicle maintenance facility between RSU 14 and the town of Wyndham, substantially in the form presented to this meeting, and to authorize the superintendent to execute the agreement on behalf of the RSU after the schedules and exhibits are updated in accordance with the explanatory notes in the agreement.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Any public comment? Okay.
Oh, can I?
Any discussion? Yeah.
On the part where it says, the schedules and exhibits are updated in accordance with the last sentence, just for the sake of the public, I mean, I think we understand what it means, but could you just?
Sure, the final bonds have not been sold for the facility, and so until they're done, there's actually the rent calculation can't actually be completed, and that's expected to be done sometime in November. And once that's done, we'll be sure to update the board as far as where all those things fall. In addition, I think there'll be some great interest from all of us, because with the addition of being able to be considered for subsidy, how that might also impact subsidy into future years once those calculations are completed. But at this moment, they have not been completed. Those have not been done, so that we've not had our official last rent document done.
Are you getting ready to speak?
I was trying to remember what I know we had the discussion in the presentation last week from Bill Hansen and Mr. Howell. And then there was talk of a recommendation from the Finance Committee in terms of that. And that was formalized in the minutes of the meeting that the Finance Committee recommends that we go, because there was the question about the first payment,
Right.
which would be due in May, which is in our current budget. When we first made the budget, we expected our lease expense to be a certain amount. And so rather than try to take we had the discussion of whether to take funds from contingency to make a whole first payment based on the bond payments and our the leases, how that's lining up. And we did some research to see, or Mr. Howell did some work with the Department of Education to see if there was any benefit in potential reimbursement down the road to do that whole payment. But to the best of our knowledge, based on what the current formula is, that's subject to change, especially with a new administration coming in. But based on the information that we have, there was no economic benefit to paying ahead, so to speak. So the town agreed to let us do that first payment, and that's what we recommend, a smaller first payment that aligns with what was already approved in the budget.
Okay. Any other? Nobody's raising their hand? Okay. So, all those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Could we have a motion to enter into executive session, please?
I move to enter into executive session to discuss the superintendent's evaluation pursuant to 1 MRSA 405-6A.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries.
These are the ones that don't actually.
Okay, we've returned from executive session. Could I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. I didn't ask